Now on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, and the Gemara is going to try to prove that even if the Torah requires kesef, as it does in the parsha of Shvuas Modeh Miktsas in Shmos Chof Beis and Parsha Mishpatim, despite that, we don't require kesef tzuri. Harei Taina, when a man is tovea his friend money, d'chsiv ki yited ish al re'eu kesef o kelim. So let's underline the word kesef, and then we'll underline the word okay, the phrase o kelim. So the nitba was modeh b'miksat taina. So let's say the tovea demanded 100, and the nitba says, I only owe you 50. So in such a case, the Torah requires that the nitba take a shvua doraisa called shvuas modeh b'miksas. Utnan. And the Mishnah says in Masechet Shvuos, Daf Lamed Ches Amid Beis, Shvuos Hadayonim Hataina Shtei Kesef Hauda Shava Pruta. The Shvuos Hadayonim, that the Dayonim Amachayev, the Nitba, if he was Modeh Mixes Hataina, is not a chiyuv that's imposed unless the Taina itself was Shtei kesef. Shtei kesef means shtei mos of kesef. Haudah, and the nitba was moded to at least a minimum of a shava pruta, which is the shear of mammon and kol tarkula. And the Gemara Masechet Shvuos on Daf Lamed Tes Amid Beis brings a machlokas Rav and Shmuel how to interpret the Mishnah's Hataina Shtei kesef. According to Shmuel, it means the tviyah of ki'itein ish kesef has to be a minimum tvi of shtei kesef, which is shtei mos shel kesef. And the Tovea says, I gave you shtei mos. The nitba is modeh miktas. He's modeh on one pruta, and he was kofar on the rest, or he was modeh on everything except for a pruta. That's Shmuel. Rav, on the other hand, says that what the Mishnah has in mind is the kfira. In other words, the kfira of the taina has to be b'shtei kesef. So the tovea, if he's tovea pachos mishtei mos upruta, and the nitba is kofer with shtei kesef, he's only modeh on a pruta. So since his hodah was on shtei kesef, therefore he's chayav shvuas modeh miktas. But either way, whether you take Rav or Shmuel, then it comes out that according to Chachamim, they were kover that the kesef in the parsha of ki yited ish el re'eu kesef o kelim is a shear of shtei mos. And one ma is not enough. So we see that kesef, according to the way the Chacham interpret it, is shtei mos, not one ma. So we have no choice but to assume that kesef in the Torah, it means a shovi erech mamoni kolshu. It's not a kesef that's Yotze B'Otza, a matbea. We're not talking about a specific matbea. The Torah doesn't say how much it is. So the Chacham were Meshayir that the tain has to be shtei mos or more. That's a taina chashuva. And that taina chashuva has the power to be mechayev shvua if the nitba is kofer. But if you would accept Rav Asi, that when the Torah says kesef, it means matbea tsuri, then the din would be that it's enough of a taina on ma achas, because we said that ma achas is the lowest definition of kesef in the Torah. It's the matbea ketana shebeina matbeos hatzurios. It's the least expensive matbea amongst the list of matbeos hatzurios. So why do we require a tviyah on shtei mos? And the Gemara says, you know what? Kesef in the Torah means matbea tzuris, as Rav Asi said it. But nevertheless, if the Torah did not explicitly tell you how much kesef, then it means ma'achas. Hasam, for example, in Union Shvua, the Torah says, Kesef Dumya de Kalim. So the Torah equated Kesef with Kalim. And therefore, we're going to apply the following principle. Ma Kalim Shnayim, just like Kalim is in a plural form grammatically, Af Kesef Shnayim. So to Kesef means at least Shnayim. And what does that mean? It means 2 times the lowest matbea of tzuris, which means a dinar. I'm sorry, did I say a dinar? I meant to say a ma, right? So a ma is the lowest of all the various values of matbea tzuris. And if you multiply 2, you get 2 mos. And the Gemara now adds, Uma kesef dover chashuv, af kalim dover chashuv. In other words, the kalim likewise, like the kesef, have to be worth a minimum of 2 mos. If they're worth less than 2 mos, they're not chashuvim, they don't have that chashivus to be tovea a shvua. So the Gemara asks another kasha on Rav Asi now. If you're telling me kesef arba b'Torah means a matbea varei pijon maser sheni dechsibo v'nasati ba'kesef v'tzarto v'nasato ba'kesef v'tzarto ha'kesef b'yodecha utnan haporet sela mimos meiser sheni. There's a mission in the second parak of meiser sheni, and a person is asking for small change from a sela of kesef of meiser sheni. And what happened was he was machalel the kedushas meiser sheni onto nechoshes, prutos, onto prutos, which we said is nechoshes. So he was already machalel the kedushas meiser sheni of the peros, and he's machal the meiser on prutos. And prutos, as we said before, refers to nechoshes. And now he wants to convert through a money changer those prutos of nechoshes to sloim shel kesef. But in any event, you see clearly that even though with regard to pidyon maser it says kesef, nevertheless you can be mechaled on prutos shel nechoshes. According to Rav Asi, whenever the Torah employs the word kesef, then it means matbea tzuri, and therefore you'd require at least a ma for pidyon or chilul meiser sheni. Because again, the ma is the cheapest base bottom matbea of kesef tzuri. So in any event, just to summarize the Gemara's kasha, we see clearly that you could be porei onto nechoshes. Where's the requirement of kesef tzuri? So the Gemara answers kesef ha kesef riba. It doesn't say v'nasato ba'kesef, v'tzarta kesef v'tzarta kesef biyodecha, but rather v'tzarta ha kesef biyodecha. So the hey of the word ha kesef is superfluous, and that's going to be used for a ribui, and it's marbe the validity of being machal meiser sheni on prutos, even though elsewhere where the Torah says kesef, it means kesef matbea shel tzuri. Whereas another kasha in Rav Asi, farei hegdesh, if you po the sod of hegdesh, and this is the case of steach uzoso, he was makdish steach uzoso, now he wants to redeem it. Tichsivbo, the Torah says, with regard to being podeh, a sada that he was magdish a steach chuza, v'nasata kesef v'komlo. The Omar Shmuel, hegdei shava monish achil al shava pruta mechulo. Shmuel says you can be mechalel an object of Hegdesh, even though it's worth a full mana, onto a Shava Pruta. And it's Mechula. And therefore goes L'chula. And this is an expression or a din that emanates from the principle of Ein Ono Behekdeshos. In any event, according to Rav Asi, since it says Kesef in the Torah, Menasata Kesef Kamlo, that's Mashma Matbeh Tsuri, and it should have been a minimum of a Ma. And yet, it says here that if there's any amount for the pigeon is Chal. Whereas according to Rabbi Asi, we should have established that Chil Hegdesh can only Chal on a Ma, but not a less than a Ma. So Gemara answers, Hasam Nami. There too, in regard to pigeon Hegdesh, like we had a pigeon Ma'aser Sheni, there's an extra word that we're going to use for a drasha, for a ribu. Kesef Yolef. In pigeon Hegdesh, it says Kesef. And in Ma'aser it says Kesef. And just like in Ma'aser, and the Kavanah here is Ma'aser Sheni, the Torah is Marbe, you could be Poda, Ma'aser Sheni onto a Pruta. And therefore we're going to use the same yardstick and apply the same formula, the same din to Chil Hegdesh. But elsewhere, when we're not talking about pigeon of Hegdesh or pigeon of Ma'aser Sheni, then the rule is whenever the Torah says Kesef, it means Matbeh Tzuris and the minimum of a Ma. Frekti Gemara, I have another kashan Rav Asi Varei Kiddushin Isha Dichsiv. It says with regard to Kiddushin Kikach Ishu Bal of a Gomar Kicha Mistei Ephron, that just like in Stei Ephron it says Nosata Kesef Asoda Kach Mimeni. So too, by virtue of the Kicha of Stei Ephron, because it says Kach Mimeni, we have a Gzeira Shava to Kikach Ishisha. And it means that based on this Gzeira Shava, we're going to derive the conclusion that Isha Niknes Bekesef, as we've learned in the past. Utanana, here we have a Mishnah Beit Hillel Omrim, Pruta V'Shava Pruta. The name of Frekti Gemara, Rav Asi, the Omer Beit Shammai, is Rav Asi holding that the halach is like Beit Shammai against Beit Hillel. We never paskin like Beit Shammai against Beit Hillel. And therefore, when Beit Hillel paskins that Pruta V'Shava Pruta, and that means that Kesef includes Shava Pruta, you don't need a Matbeh Tzuris. Unless you assume that Rav Asi holds like Beit Shammai. And Beit Shammai require a dinar. Now, based on this kasha, the Gemara now tries to fix up the correct girsa, the text of the Maimer of Rav Asi, Itmar. What was the Maimer of Rav Asi? Hachi Itmar. Rabbi Yudom Rav Asi, Kol Kesef Kotzu V'Omer Torah. When the Torah says specifically how much you pay. For example, 3 examples. Number 1, a ma'anis or mafata narabsula, he's got to pay 50 shekel. Number 2, if a shar of Ruvain goes out and kills Shimon Evach, then you pay, he kills the Eved Kanani of Shimon, then you pay a knas of 30 shekel. And number 3, we have Motzi Shemra. When a man is Motzi Shemra on his wife who's a Basula, he has to pay a knas of 100 shekel. So we see that these are 3 cases in which the Torah has Kesef Kotzu. Is then we assume that the Torah is referring to a certain value of money of Kesef Tzori. But V'shel Devreim, if there was Kesef Kotzu, that the Chachamim established as a chiv, then Kesef Medina, there's no need to translate it into Kesef Tzuri. So frek the Gemara now. Maika Mashmalon, what did Rav Asi add that we didn't know? Tnina, we learned in the Mishnah in Bechoros Mem Tesam and Beis, Chamesh Sloim for Pigeon Aben. Is Shloshim Shel Eved if Hareg Shargo Eved. And the Knas of Chamishim Kesef of Onus of Mefata, in all the above cases, is Mea Shel Motzi Shemra This is a fourth case. So we have Pidyon Aben, we have Shloshim Shkolim Shel Eved, Chamishim Kesef of Onesum of Fata and Arab Sula, and we have Mea Kesef in the case of Motzi Shema. And in the Parsha Motzi Shema, which is in Dvarim Perek Chav Beis, is Kulam, all of the above, is B'Shekel HaKodesh B'Monetzuri. So once we have this explicit in the Brisa, in the Mishnah in Bechoros, what did Rav Asi add to the Mishnah? And the Gemara answers again, as we saw earlier, Shal Devrayim Kesem Medina Tztuchle. He had to teach me the seifa of his words, that if the Chachamim set up a Kesef Katzuv, nevertheless, we pay that up with Kesef Medina, and the Chacham never had in mind Kesef Tzuri. And the Gemara says that where do we find somewhere in the Mishnah what exactly is kesef with regard to katzuv midivrei sofer? Lo tanan. Gemara says you can't find it anywhere in the Mishnah. Therefore, we need Rav Asi to explicate and establish that Shel Devrayim is always kesef medina. It's not kesef tzuri. The Sanya, like we learned in a Brisa, this is from actually a Mishnah in Bava Kama Daf Tzadi, with regard to Chovel B'Chavero, HaTokea L'Chavero, a man blows a shofar, whatever it is, a horn, into the ears of his friend, and his friend gets deaf, no sein lo sela. Now we're talking about Tmei Boshes. So Tmei Boshes is evaluated as a sela. And Rav Asi comes to teach us Lo Tema, my sela, Arba Zuzi, that a sela here in the Mishnah is a sela tzuri, which is Arba Zuzin. Ella, my sela Medina. I added those two words. Sela is Palga de Zuza Davidi Inshi de Karola Palga Zuzi Istira. So a sela Medina, which is 1/8 of a sela tzuri, as we discussed earlier, its value is palga de zuzi, which means half v'zuz tzuri, because the sela itself is arba zuzi, so half a zuz is 1/8. Is davidi ish the karol palga de zuzi? Isra means a sela. So bnei Adam are very likely or regilim, as we say, to use a chatzi zuz tzuri and call it a sela. And now the Gemara goes back to the drawing board, how to understand Beit Shammai's requirement of a dinar. Rav Shimon Lakish Omer Tamayu de Beit Shammai Kechizkiah. Tiomar Chizkiah Makra. The Torah says in the Parsha of Amivriya that if neither the Adon nor his son are interested in Yud, meaning to marry this Amivriya, so the Parsha says in Mishpatim Shmos Chaf Aleph, Vehefda, and the Gemara is medayik in the language, the grammatical formulation of Vehefda. Now, Vehefda indicates that there's a mitzvah on the Adon to allow for Pidyon Ha'ama. Again, as long as there's mammon here that's bona fide mammon. So Chizkiah is medayik in the Lashon HaKasuv, in the Pasuk's language, it says, Ha'ama okrovea heim apodim, right? We assume that one of the relatives of the Amivriya will be poda the Amivriya. So therefore, it should have said v'nifdeis, that would imply that there's an Amma who has a schus to be poda herself. Why does the Torah say vefda, putting the emphasis on the Adon? And therefore, she doesn't have to give the entire value of the period of Amhus, but rather we calculate how much Amhus she's already fulfilled, how much was in the balance, and she pays to redeem herself with the balance. The Gemara says the following: I understand the words of Chizkiah. If he gave her a dinar, and that's how he's Mekadosh with a dinar. Hainu, now I understand Chizkiah, Dimagara Viazla, right? The pigeon of an Amivriya is called Giron Kesef, meaning we subtract how much of the time period she hasn't yet fulfilled. She hasn't yet implemented her Amos. And that amount is called Migra because whatever she had left, we're going to have to subtract that from the dinar that achieved the original kinyan. Because we need Giron Kesef. Ad Pruta. Meaning, even if, let's say, she worked for 5.9 years, and all that's left is a pruta's worth of on the last of the 6-year period, she could still go out Bigiron Kesef. She just compensates the Adon for that pruta. And this makes sense, meaning Rav Chizkiah's words, if you hold that an Amavriya cannot be niknes with less than a dinar. Let's say the scenario was such that the Yoivla Pruta is that I don't understand. Me Pruta mi Megara. If let's say that the balance of the 6 years of Amos would be worth a pruta, so how are you going to be Megorea with a pruta? He was only kono with a pruta. For a pruta, he got 6 years worth of work. How could it possibly be that there's a giron here from a pruta? It'll have to be less than a shava pruta. So we see clearly that an Amavriya is not niknes with anything less than a dinar. And later on, Reish Lakish is going to explain that Beit Shammai learned from Kiddushin Isha to Kinyan Amha, and therefore you need a minimum of a dinar. So now the Gemara asks, this is a little bit of a digression from what we were studying until now. Maybe the Torah meant to say that if he was kona of a dinar, tigarad pruta, then she can be gorea pijano up till a pruta and go lecheres. But heicha the yoiv le pruta, if the original kinyan was only with a pruta, is then lo tigra klal. There's no possibility of giron kesef on a pruta. And here we turn to Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Lo sal kedaita. Gemara answers that it's not possible to entertain the idea or the possibility that an Amma should be nikdes with a shear of kesef, which doesn't lend itself to giron kesef, because the din of giron kesef for a hefta is dumya de yehud. It's got to be similar to the law of yehud. And with regard to Kiddushin Isha of Yehud, Ma Yehud Afal Gav the Iboy Miyayed, the Iboy Lo Miyayed, Kol Hecha the Lomotzi Miyayed, Lo Avi Zvini Zvini. even if the Adon decides that he wants to be miyad, meaning he wants to be mekadesh the Amma during the days of Hashifchus, and he's willing to pay a certain amount of money, or he wants to reject the idea of Yid, he doesn't want to be mekadesh. When she works until the last day of the kinyan, kol hechdelo motzi miyayid lo avis vini zvini. If she'll be sold in such a way that it's not possible to have yud, for example, let's say the Av wants to sell his daughter as an Amma to Krovim, to relatives that are Asurim Be'isur Erva, so therefore there's no possibility of Yud, is law of Izvini Izvini. The Mechira is not a valid Mechira, but rather it's Betela. It's not royally Yud. Is Hachinami here too in this din of Kiron Gesef, Kol Heichad Lo Motzi Migora Lo Av Izvini Izvina. In any situation that there will be a sale in a scenario in which it's impossible, a sale of an impossible to go out Begiron Kesef. For example, if the Adon bought her with a pruta, and Yef Shaligara Mimenu, is law of Izvini Izvini, the Mechira is not a valid Mechira to start. Now let's just add, I know it's a little bit late, but let's just add one last paragraph to finish up on Rav Shimon Lakish, who explains the reasoning of Beit Shammai why Kiddush Isha requires a minimum of a dinar. The Kiddush Isha li Beit Shammai nafkalu mi Amevriya, from Kiddush Yehud of Amevriya. Ma Amevriya bepruta lo makanya. You cannot be makadesh the Amevriya with a pruta af Isha bepruta lo makacha. Frek the Gemara, I don't get it. V'ema palga the dinar. Reish Lakish, you're assuming that you require a dinar for a kinyan amma. How do you know such a thing? Maybe it's enough a palga, half of a dinar. And that would mean that when he has to purchase the amma with more than a pruta, in order that there should be a kiyum of the possibility of Torah skiron kesef, so it should be enough even with maxis dinar. And furthermore, you should say that the Sadai Liknosa V'shtei Prutos, that should be valid because it lends itself to Giron Kesef. And the Gemara answers, Fikdemi Pruta Ukmea Dinar. Once we prove from the Pasuk that with regard to Kinyan Amma, it's not enough to be Kona with a Pruta, we're going to now conclude and derive the conclusion that the Torah requires a Kinyan of Matbeach Chashuv, and therefore we should go up to a dinar. We should say the Kinyan that is required, which is a Matbeach Chashuv, is a dinar. So you go from a Pruta all the way to a dinar. And for tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem will have a fourth explanation of Beit Shammai, and that is Rava. Let me thank you and wish you a great night.